Greetings, everyone. It's a pleasure to have a nice audience for this event. My name is Peter Young. I'm a member of the Committee 100 and on the board and also the New York Regional Chair. But for the purposes of this event, I happen to be head of the Asian American Career Ceilings Initiative that started 5 years ago for the purpose of really trying to help understand, scrutinize, find solutions uh, for this issue of Asian American career ceilings. Because as we all know, Asian Americans have no trouble at the entry level, certainly getting into great schools and getting into good companies. But somewhere in the middle, they get stuck. And they get stuck for a lot of reasons. Not all Asian Americans get stuck. Some ethnicities within Asian American do better than others, like Indian Americans. But the group as a whole does not do well. And I think the whole purpose of this program is to try to understand why, but also to help people and to create change in the areas where change is needed in order for Asian Americans to be as successful as they should be relative to their representation. Our view is an even playing field is a key, and that's what we aim for. Uh, this particular event is titled Personal Marketing and Mentorship. And although we've had some panels and things in the past about mentorship and personal marketing, there's a particular focus this time because the survey showed that of the three leading reasons why Asian Americans feel that their career has been impeded, the of the three highest mentioned, personal, their own behavior and mentorship was cited very, very high. And it's interesting that they felt that their own behavior was key, that they weren't being assertive enough, they weren't developing mentorship relationships. But that basically is the case, and that is, in fact, a main reason. So this panel is really trying to address those two issues. We have three marvelous panelists. I purposely tried to have a diverse group. We have people from industry, from healthcare, from technology, and from the world of Silicon Valley, and we have male, female, Chinese American, Indian American, and so forth. So we have a little bit of a variety here. So I'd like to start out and ask each. We have Raj Gupta, who's co-chair of the board of advisors of Johns Hopkins, but he has a long career in industry as a CEO. We have Bob Lee, who is currently the chairman of the board of Blue Shield of California, but he had a very successful career in technology in AT&T. And Deb Liu, who has been in the technology world, built up a significant part of Meta at Facebook, and then took over as CEO of Ancestry.com. By the way, Deb, I'm afraid to take it because I'm afraid to find out that Marco Polo actually was one of my relatives or something. And so I don't want to know some dark thing that probably is true is best that I don't know, right?
I can send you a kit. I can send you a kit, and you should find out.
Well, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out why my two sisters seem to have children who all seem to be blonde, and blue eyes. But fortunately, my son does not have blue eyes and blonde hair. So maybe I was the adopted one. I don't know. So let me take it, and maybe if you could, in just alphabetical order, if and Bob by last name. Bob, your excuse me, I mean Raj, you're first alphabetically by last name. So maybe you could take a couple minutes, just describe your career and what do you do today.
So you want me to go first?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me on this. I give you literally a 2-minute version of my career. I was born in India, 1945. It's been a long time ago. Of course, I was just turned 80. And I studied mechanical engineering at Indian Institute of Technology in Bombay. In 1967, I graduated, came to Cornell to study computer science and operations research. Started first 2 years with a company called Scott Paper, and most of you know Scott Paper tissues and towels. And then 2 years later, I joined a company called Rohm, a specialty chemical company, which among other things discovered plexiglass as well. And then while I was at Scott Paper, I also finished my MBA in finance at Drexel. And then I actually spent 39-year career at Rohm and ended up with having 13 jobs, 17 bosses in 3 continents. And I had functional jobs in planning and finance, regional business, global business. And of course, last 10 years, I was chairman and CEO, one of the very first Indian Americans who became CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And beyond Rohm I have been very fortunate to serve on 15 public company boards, including DuPont, Hewlett Packard, Tyco, across many, many different industries, and 7 private companies and family-owned companies. And then finally, I would say, I'm very fortunate to have 2 daughters and 3 grandsons who really make up our family. And in the last few years, we have focused very much on giving back. And that includes Hopkins India Institute, Drexel Governance Institute, and 2 fellowships at Cornell. So that's a brief history of my career. It's been an interesting one for sure. And I've enjoyed it very much and be more than happy to share the role that mentors played and what led to change in my own behavior along my journey as well.
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, Raj and I, who've been dear friends for a long time, and the one thing he didn't mention, I mean, his career is a great background for this panel, but the other part is that the number of CEOs today, who are CEOs today, that he mentored in his company, it's a huge number, 50 something, something like that, right?
51, yes.
Yeah, 51. So he also is on the other side, which is trying to help people succeed. Okay, so Bob, you're next.
Okay. I've always described myself as being a pretty simple background, 1 job and 1 wife. I had one employer, when I mean 1 job, and that was AT&T for my career. And I started there after getting my bachelor's degree in electrical engineering at USC and my MBA at Cal. Born and raised in California. My parents were born and raised in Toisan, China. In fact, I was just telling Deb that we just took our family of 10, including our 4 grandchildren, back to our ancestral villages last June for a marvelous experience in tracing back our roots. So anyway, I started with Pacific Bell, which was a part of AT&T system back in 1972, long time ago, and rose through the ranks. And when I retired in 1998, I was executive vice president of marketing and sales. And then there was another role that I had as president of one of the 3 business units of the company. So my perspective is one of a big corporation. We were a 60,000 person corporation. I had about 25,000 of those people reporting to me. Much of my career was marketing and sales. So a lot of my orientation and what you'll hear in my comments later about mentorship stems from that kind of point of view. I certainly grew up in an environment business-wise where there weren't very many people that looked like me. And in fact, much like Raj is talking about, when I became an executive vice president in '87, I was told I was the only senior officer throughout the country in terms of telecommunications who was Asian American. So my perspective that I'll share today is also from one of being keenly aware of being different than the rest of the universe. I've heard all those terms about, oh yeah, Asian Americans, you're good workhorses, but not racehorses and things like that. And I think today's session is not about whining about that, but it's figuring out what we do about that to change the scenarios going forward. Since retirement, I've been on a number of boards, including the chairmanship of Blue Shield California and many other startup and public companies and private companies. Also spent a fair amount of time in the nonprofit world. I was formerly the chair of the Committee of 100 back in 2003 for 4 years. And I'm currently a mentor in the Big Brothers, Big Sisters program in the Bay Area. And chaired an organization bringing tutoring and tennis to inner city kids and things like that. So I'm enjoying that kind of nonprofit world as well as family at this stage of my life.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you, like Raj, have had a fantastic track record of helping people succeed, which we congratulate you on. Deb, you're next and last.
Yeah, so I have the honor of being last after these two illustrious gentlemen. I started my career. I went to Duke. I actually have my Duke sweatshirt in the back. My daughter just got in, so I borrowed her sweatshirt. Then I went to Duke in engineering, and I came out, did some consulting. I went on to Stanford for my MBA, and that's what brought me to the Bay Area. And I stumbled into tech. I saw a small company with a few hundred employees called PayPal, and I joined and had the craziest adventure of my life. I integrated PayPal with eBay, so I led the PayPal side of the integration, and eventually went on to work in corporate strategy. Then I led the buyer experience at eBay. I got a call while I was on maternity leave with my second child to join a small startup called Facebook, which had 900 employees at the time. I left when there were 66,000, and my team was probably 900 when I left. And I went on after 11 years. I worked on a number of products at Facebook, including running payments and games. I worked on ads, ad network, and then eventually, I guess everyone knows me for having built Facebook Marketplace. So if you've ever bought or sold anything on Facebook Marketplace, that's my baby, and I still use it to this day. I went on to become the CEO of Ancestry. It was owned by private equity, Blackstone, multi-billion-dollar business, and finding, as Bob and Peter talked about, finding your roots to, genealogy as well as DNA. And so that was a 4-year adventure. And then I took some time off last year because I felt like, I was diagnosed with cancer last year. I took some time off. And then after that, after treatment, I just plunged in and learned AI. And, this is the next revolution. I was there for the internet revolution. I was there for, mobile, cloud. And now the next revolution is AI. And I wanted to be in the front lines of that. So I started an AI startup, which I'm happy to talk to you guys about at any time. But I also am on the board of Intuit and Poshmark. And I started a nonprofit, Women in Product. I'm also on the board today of C100. Thank you, Peter, for the invitation. And, Peter was my sponsor for C100. So
I'm proud of it, by the way.
Yes. And one thing of note is that, Ascend did a study, especially Asian women, they make 13% of tech workers and 3% of executives. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm happy to unpack, but as somebody who ran that gauntlet and got to the very top seat, I can tell you that it's not easy. And it's a mix of expectations and the reality on the ground. So it's both you and the system. And we can talk more about that. I'm happy to answer your questions around that too.
Yeah. So, those of you in the audience, you can see why we have these 3 people, all of whom have a very rich, and by the way, Deb doesn't say, but she's also a fantastic mentor of people. She's really been terrific, and she's known for that, and not just women, men and women and so forth. And so all 3 of them have really both had very, very successful careers, but also have had very successful personal efforts in terms of mentoring and helping other people and nonprofits. So we've got a wonderful panel here. So let's start out with the marketing question. And I think personal marketing is probably one of the most ambiguous, broad terms. You could take 20 people and ask them each one what they define as personal marketing. You get a different answer. So I'm going to ask each of the 3 panelists here, what do you think about personal marketing from a career perspective, right? There's different kinds of personal marketing, but from a career perspective, and how would you define the concept, and how did you apply it to the concept to your own career throughout your career. And by the way, no panelist has to answer any particular question in any particular order. So whoever wishes to comment, please comment.
Well, I've often used the metaphor for my career or anyone's career as being like products on a shelf. And our challenge is being selected by the consumer out of a whole bunch of products that are on the shelf. Why would somebody pick me? Why would somebody pick you? And it comes down to how do you stand out among a whole series of people that might all look the same, have the same backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. How do you stand out? And part of that has to do with speaking out. And I remember having a conversation with one of my peers towards the end of my career. He and I were, in the top 5 of the company, and he was saying, "Geez, in my family, we were a Jewish American family, and my father around the dinner table would poke at us and provoke us in discussions around the dinner table to get us to debate back." And I thought to myself, gosh, that's about the opposite around my table, where we were very obedient Chinese American kids and in a traditional family where debate around that table was not something that we promoted, not something that we did. We certainly didn't argue around the table, that sort of thing. So I thought then that, oh yeah, there are some differences in terms of background, cultural background, that we have to maybe push back against sometimes. I can remember during situations in, let's say, group meetings, and somebody would come to me and say, you were kind of quiet in that meeting, Bob. Where are you coming from? And I realized that if I didn't speak up, people didn't know where I was coming from. So inside my head, I'm thinking, oh, I agree with the point of view that's being talked around the table. I don't need to jump on and add to that conversation because I agree. Well, there's a certain faultiness to that, because people want to know where you're coming from. They want to know what you stand for. They want to know what you think. And I think as Asian Americans, it becomes even more important, because the stereotype is that, oh, we're quiet, we're maybe passive or whatever it is. So one of the things that I've learned during my career and relates to the idea of personal marketing is one must press against some inclinations to just be in the background and make sure that you're in the foreground.
When was the pivot point for you, Bob? So, I mean, I shared the same experience, which was when I was growing up, was traditional Chinese American, just, work hard and go to MIT and they'll figure it out, right? But it doesn't work that way. So where at some point did you break off from what your parents told you to do and became more assertive and more marketing?
Yeah, I don't know that I can pinpoint a spot, Peter. I mean, in high school, I decided, well, I think I'll be student body president. I don't know where that came from. My parents were not exactly people that would, endorse that kind of thing, but I was, I was captain of the tennis team. I took these leadership roles, but I'm not sure where that came from. It wasn't a conscious decision like I've got to do something. But I do remember at work, in the work situation, so often people are vying for that next rung up in the ladder, and one had to kind of muscle themselves into the conversation. And if you didn't, you just were kind of pushed to the side. And I just realized, for the sake of my family, for the sake of myself, I've got to push myself to the center of the conversation.
Raj, how about you, your experience?
Well, I mean, I 200% relate to what Bob shared here. And I will tell you my turning point. And this is now back in 1993 when I was moving from London to come back to United States and head of Asia. And I had a Greek boss. And he said, Raj, can we have a drink together before you depart? And I said, sure. And he said, Raj, I only have one advice for you. You have good ideas, but you only express to us after the meeting is over. So speak up. Otherwise, you're going to cheat yourself and you're going to cheat the company. I mean, he was so explicit about speaking up, not just for the sake of speaking up. Is if you have confidence, you have ideas which are either supporting or contrary to the discussion topic is, don't hold back. On the other hand, I would say marketing aggressively is not something that is recommended, at least not based on my experience. I think it has to be subtle. It has to be based on contributions you make and how you think of the job you have beyond just doing it, but what you can do more for the company. And others have to notice that you have some outstanding quality, including your peers.
Yeah.
And I think this is so I am not frankly a big believer based on my experience of sort of aggressively quote unquote marketing yourself. But I do believe that confidence, and also, one other thing I would say is that I noticed that with many Asian Americans is their willingness to accept what I call they consider this a negative feedback. Although many times the feedback is intended for your improving your skills and your performance, but it's perceived as a personal attack. And that means they don't want to promote me or don't want to give me a raise, and hence they're giving me a negative feedback. And I think, clearing your mind about accepting feedback as it's presented and understanding what the rationale for it is so important because it does raise your awareness about yourself as well. And when we talk about mentors, I'll talk a number of examples that I've experienced about mentors, because mentors are not just there to give you a positive feedback. Mentors are only good if they give you a good feedback, both on the positive side in your strengths and the areas where you need to work on.
You made a very good point, Raj, about uh, it's not just speaking loudly and being aggressive about, and maybe a point that I've heard from many people is every company, every organization has a different personality.
Yeah.
And what you've got to think about is, given the culture and the personality, what is an acceptable way to promote yourself and so forth. And it's very different company by company. I suspect, that's the case. So it's not just being more assertive, it's understanding what's the acceptable culture about personal marketing within your company and making sure you don't violate, what that culture is. Deb, you've been in a very different, in the swashbuckling world of tech, right? So whatever, right? So in startups and so forth. So what was your experience? What does personal marketing mean to you, and how did it apply to you in your career?
Well, I just remember I was doing a talk, Eva Chen, I don't know if you guys know her, but she basically was interviewing me and somebody raised their hand. It was around our review time at Meta. And somebody said, well, what is your piece of advice for, peer reviews? And I said, well, you need to educate your manager on, what you're doing. Write your self-review first. And the person responds, but I'm really bad at self-promotion. And I said, stop, because if you think it's self-promotion, you're not going to do justice to what you did. Your job is to educate your manager. They do not know. I said, look, I manage a team. I had I don't know, 8 direct reports and like hundreds of, indirect reports. And I said, I do not know what any individual is doing on a day-to-day basis, but if you treat it as self-promotion to tell people what you did, you've already lost. And because that's what I learned along the way, which was, I think a lot of cultures, especially the Asian American culture, as the Asian culture is very keep your head down. My parents were like, keep your head down, do the work, and people will recognize it. That's not how the workplace works. Okay. I've been in those promotion meetings, I've been in the calibration meetings. How it works is there's a huge bias towards people willing to speak up. There's a huge bias towards people who shout the loudest, who, are extroverted, who have the last word. And is that fair? Absolutely not. And yet at the same time, that's the reality. And so you need to understand that in order to function within this ecosystem, success means actually educating people about what you're doing, not just doing the work. A lot of people can do the work. Very few people can tell the story of the work that they're doing.
Yeah. Now I want to go to a second point, which is this. When you talk about personal marketing, there's internal and there's external. And it's very complicated, right? It's very complicated. Internal is how manage your relationships, people within the company, how you make sure they understand what you believe in and how you develop relationships. Outside personal marketing is quite different. And it could be whether you write a book or whether you're on talk shows or whether you're part of industry organizations, so forth. I mean, a good example is just because I was interested to give back, many, many years ago, I became involved with some of the leading industry associations that were very community oriented, so forth. I didn't realize until later that, in fact, that helped me also within my own company, right? Because the extent to which I was seen as a leader doing good things in industry related organizations, that actually helped and I didn't realize it until later. So each of you have had both internal but also external marketing and relationships, all of you, right? And you've all written books, given speeches, so forth, whatever. I've read a number of your books and things, so forth. And Raj, I read all of your articles, right? So tell me, how should the audience think in terms of external personal marketing? Because they're different methods, different ways, and they have different effects. Any comments?
Well, I'm a big believer in having a perspective that is beyond your organization or inside out. And the only way you develop that or have is really having outside in perspective. So, in my career, every job I had, I attended industry meetings. When I was running a business, going out and visiting customers was one of my highest priorities, because I think that's where I learned about what they thought of the company. When I was in a division role or running Asia and they dealt with the investors, I went out to the investors and listened to their perspective about the company. And getting that outside perspective is such an important input to your own personal growth and making decisions for your own organization. And at the end of the day, it's very similar to what happens inside the company. You don't have to promote yourself. If you are reaching out to people, they listen to you, you take their inputs and it is such an important part of success in today's world. And given the speed at which the things are changing and the number of factors at work, having that external network when you can call in somebody and ask them a question and they will be straightforward and honest in responding to what you're asking. And the only way you do that if you build the relationship. So I think spending time with outside network is a very critical part of professional growth and personal growth.
Yeah. And was it noticed, were your outside activities noticed by people, the leadership in your company, and did that have an effect?
For sure, because every business I ran by going out and meeting my customers and bringing their perspective in the meetings as opposed to just saying what I think, is to say, here I was visiting so and so, and this is what I heard. And I think that is such an important part. And by the way, I know situations where individuals think that socializing and external context is a waste of time.
Yeah.
So I think that to me is such an important part of it, and I'm sure that it had a lot to do with in my own career success as well.
Bob, how about you? I mean, you're in a different industry and AT&T and so forth, but I suspect this issue was part of your career. And also, I'll supplement this question by saying, is it helpful if you're part of industry associations, for example, right? And all three of you are in industries where there are industry associations, so forth, that interacting and being involved with that that help. So Bob, for you?
Yeah, there's no question, Peter, and I think of it um, uh, as a very fluid line going from internal to external because both have both they feed on each other. So it was very important to have uh, a good eye on what was happening in the marketplace, in the industry, in the world at large, and it informed, my thinking and decision making about internal. But I'd like to harken back though to something that both Raj and Deb said that before I forget that because they talked about the personal marketing and if you felt like it was forced, if you felt like it was artificial, it's probably not right or something. Or I'm just paraphrasing, but I remember a conversation. I was probably in my late 20s at the time, and so working my way up the company, and my boss at my annual review says to me, "Bob, you're very reserved and quiet. You're the guy next to you, Pete. When something bad happens in Pete's organization, his face turns flush red. He storms out of his office and says, what the hell is going on? He says, you should learn from Pete, because people know where Pete's coming from,
Yeah.
and you should be more expressive and like that." And I remember as being a very eager 20-something-year-old to succeed, uh, trying to be like Pete for a few weeks, and then feeling like this is really silly because I can't do that. I can't
Bob,
do
I
Pete.
know you. I can't imagine you raising your voice, storming out of a room. That would be quite an experience.
That's exactly right, Peter. So anyway, a lesson learned at a very young age is that you want to find ways to get your point heard, to influence people, but it's got to be comfortable to you, and it's got to be sincerely you.
Genuine, yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. And for a long time there was this very popular Dale Carnegie, right? Whatever
Yeah.
this thing, and then people realized that, and then the philosophy is just always butter up people, always say nice things, so forth. And then they realized it doesn't come across as genuine, and people who followed that figured out very rapidly that it wasn't always, for some people it might work, but in many cases it didn't work because people saw through it and said, this is,
Yeah.
you're not being genuine. This is fake.
Yeah.
This is fake praise, right?
Yeah. Right.
Now I'm going to ask a question that was not on the list I sent you, and it may not quite apply to the three of you, but and the reason why is that you know you know most of you have spent a lot of time in one company, right? Right, and didn't move. But one of the questions is, does outside marketing help you get a different job at a different company? You see what I mean? So, say you're fantastic at AT&T or you're fantastic at Facebook, whatever. Well, outside people may not actually know how good you are at your company. And really the question is outside marketing, is that an effective way for you to be noticed? So at least whether you choose to change job companies or not, that at least it's open. And particularly now, since times have changed, so that it is no longer a thing where you stay at one company and you get a gold watch and then you retire. So you change. So the question is, what role is outside marketing, has it had, or should it have, in terms of your being able to, be promoted from one company to another? Anyone, answer anyone.
Well, I'll share with you my perspective. So when I was at Facebook, my manager at the time, Bonds, asked one thing of me. He said, "I want you to write something and post it every month to the entire company." And I thought, this is a lot of work. I don't really like writing. I gave him all these excuses, and then I did it because that's what he asked of me. And so every month I posted something internally. And then he asked me at one point, like, why don't you post it externally? And I was like, what? So, and it was a fairly large company, tens of thousands of people are reading this, but at some point, I thought about it. And then eventually I started posting it externally. And it took me a long time because what do I have to share with the world? Like, what do I have to say? And eventually that led to me writing the Substack. So now I have a Substack with, I think, like 40,000 subscribers. I started posting on LinkedIn where a bunch of people read it. And then I wrote a book. And so, the start of the journey is putting yourself out there. I saw one of the questions in the Q&A was, how do you do this for introverts? Writing is a great way for introverts, by the way. You don't have to speak, you can write. And writing is a way, and I realize that I write all the time. I just never shared with anyone because I write to process. I've written a number of books just for fun. I've published only one of them, but I have lots of other, creative fiction type of things as well. And so I just realized that I use writing as a way to process and that I was just not sharing with anybody. And so it actually then, today I was just talking to a number of people and, somebody asked me if I was interested in joining a board. It's like, one of the top 100 companies. And they're like, oh, and by the way, I read all your writing. And I was like, whoa, okay. And so again, it's not direct. It's not, I don't write to get a job. I don't write to, get invited to events. I write for me, but there's a lot of actually secondary benefits to putting yourself out there. Is there a lot of criticism? Absolutely. I'm wrong a lot. People say a lot of things, but at the same time, those who put themselves out there risk being criticized, but they also open up conversation and opportunity. And so I'm glad I did it. When I did the Substack, I was like, I'm just doing this a year. And
What
then the second year, I'm like, I'm doing it 2 years. And now it's the fifth year.
was there any were there any downsides associated with having out, a very active communication with the outside world through these mediums?
I would say that the upside is greater than the downside. I mean, it is work. I've gotten it down to maybe an hour or two a week, so it's sustainable. I think the biggest thing is every time you put yourself out there, you're opening yourself up for criticism. And the
Yeah.
question is, do you want to deal with that? Right. And for me, the number of people who said, hey, I needed this post and I needed to hear this, it changed my life, is so much greater than the few people who were like, I wrote about how, like, what it was like being a parent and what it was like, the realities of maternity leave. And all these people said, well, why would you leave your children if you love them? I got a lot of messages like that, which,
Yeah.
by the way, my husband was really surprised because zero people ever asked him why he went to work. So again, and a lot of people ask me like, well, don't you think you would have been better off staying home with your children? And I'm like, and he's like, no one would ever say that to me. Not a single person has ever said that to me. And so but again, every time you put yourself out there, but there were a lot of women in the workforce who needed to hear that way more than the criticism that I got for actually having a career.
Now, do you think though that this outside marketing, do you think it had anything to do with how you became CEO of Ancestry.com, et cetera, et cetera?
I didn't do that much of it before I became CEO. I did some. I mean, but I'd done a lot of talks. So I do a lot of events and I do a lot of talks. I think, again, there is not one thing. Everyone is a full package of everything that they've ever done. You're not just one job or one, talk. It's the totality of everything you've done. And so it's, I call it filling your bingo card. You just like not you don't need one thing, you need all the things. And so really kind of putting together, and it's not as contrived, like I didn't have like a list where I said, these are the things I need to do, but it's really thinking through like, how do you want to show up in the world? You're gonna show. So I have a friend, Carol Izazaki, she does a lot of training, and she's like, what is your strategy? And a lot of people have these unintentional, ridiculous strategies, which is, I'm just never going to say anything. Bob is going to say, I'm going to be stoic no matter what happens. That's not a strategy. That's not his plan. That's just what happened. And so instead, if you pick an intentional strategy, which is something that you can live with and something that you want to amplify, then pick that. And so for me, it was not a single thing. It was more, I'm going to put myself out there and see what happens. And I was really open to both the goods and the bads.
Yeah. So I'd like to switch now to the second topic of our event, which is mentoring. And mentoring, I guess, is heavily used when it's a term heavily used by people when they talk about how to be successful in your career. In fact, it's probably it was one of the most mentioned reasons given for career failure in the most recent Committee 100 Asian American Career Ceiling survey that we completed in December. It was the number one factor that people said, I did not succeed in part because I didn't do a good job of either developing a mentor and so forth. So tell me how, each of you, if you could tell me how you think of mentoring in terms of how one develops mentors for your success. So there are other dimensions of mentoring, but one is getting mentors and having them be helpful to you in your career. Any comments? Bob, you want to start out, because you were in a large company.
Yeah. I don't recall ever saying to myself, I've got to go find a mentor or mentors. I always hoped that I could learn from the people around me. And I will tell my daughters and their husbands today, as they are in the workforce, that I learned as much from bad bosses as I did from good bosses.
Mm-hmm.
So, I wouldn't call those bad bosses mentors, but I learned a lot from them, So I kind of think about the constellation of people around me as people that I could learn something from. And then somewhere along the way, there were a few people that took a particular interest in me and invested time in me and shared more details about how I could improve. And I guess those became mentors. And, you've got to be open to it. You've got to be willing to invest time in it. And you've got to be, I think, willing to learn from a wide variety of people. So I would say there were a few people that I would consider being really important in my career, but there were a whole lot of people right behind them that were also very important that I learned things from that might be considered mentors too.
But what was it about your relationship with them that caused them to say, I want to be helpful to Bob, either consciously or unconsciously, and then ultimately helped you in your career? What was it? Because it had people, these people, they have, they don't have unlimited time, right? So they couldn't be mentors to every person who is in the company, right? So why did they decide to be a mentor to you?
Well, Peter, I laugh because there were at times when I wondered, what did that person see in me? Why did they want to mentor me? I really didn't know that I was particularly worthy of being mentored by them. So it's hard for me to tell. It might come back to what I was saying earlier is, was there something I did to be noticed and somehow stand out from the whole sea of people that I was competing with? But it's hard to say what it was that they saw in me. I don't know.
Well, one thing's for sure, your success was not based on having senior Asian Americans above you who would mentor you. There was no one else for you.
That is for sure.
This is true. This is true for you, Raj, right? Were there a whole bunch of senior Indian Americans above you at Rohm and Haas?
No, in fact, I was the second Indian American employee at Rohm and Haas back in 1971. In fact, I would go one step further and say, just expecting somebody with the same background as yours as a sponsor, a lot of that is discarded.
Yeah.
Okay, it just happens, this person is lucky or whatever happened kind of thing. And, that one is discounted. So I have not sponsored what I call mentored many, many Indians by any means. But I think there's a natural resistance. But I'll come back to what Bob said. I think mentors can be inside your organization, outside your organization. I remember one when I was living in France and we acquired a big company, a French company who didn't want to be acquired by us. It was a very difficult transition, and I was the CEO responsible for integrating them. And I relied one of my neighbors, a Frenchman, who had lived around the world, as somebody who was my counselor to say, Raj, if this is a situation, how should you deal with it in this culture? I mean, to me, he was a mentor. On the professional side within the organization, I think mentors are ones who happen naturally instead of assigned to you. And they see in you something beyond what anybody else sees, including yourself. And
Yeah.
I can truly name 3 or 4 of the mentors I had, including the person who hired me, who became a CFO, head of Europe, and the Greek boss I mentioned. I was very fortunate to have 3 or 4 mentors who really were so impactful in my life. And they're the ones who gave me the honest feedback. They found opportunities for me to do other things. But part of it goes back to looking at, I never looked, I was a mechanical engineer in a high-tech chemical company. And I think what they saw in me is not the technical knowledge. What they saw in me, the ability to connect the dots,
Hmm. Hmm.
what I saw as a trend, and be able to then have the courage to express how we should be addressing this issue. That's really what they saw as a value in me than being an expert in terms of technology or the know-how or anything else. And in fact, I ended up out of 13 jobs I mentioned, 6 jobs were created for me or eliminated after I finished them. They were special projects for 1 or 2 years.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think that's really what, to me, I mean, and I would say in today's world, in tomorrow's world, ability to connect the dot and make choices and understand the risk and finding the team to execute those plans is so much more important than it was when my career was evolving.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm a big fan of Raj's, as everyone knows. But one factor, which I think is probably true, it's not a mentorship uh, point, is the ability to see the big picture as well as the details. And Raj, you always, I remember years ago, you gave a speech. You said, which was a great illustration of that. He says, just because you're in an industry segment doesn't mean that your segment in the industry is entitled to make money. You could get squeezed by your customer, you could squeezed by your supplier and never make money. And even if you're a leader in your sector, you all, it's all possible to you all. And that's when I realized, that Raj has some special skills in terms of the big picture. Yeah,
In fact, that led to the massive transformation of our portfolio, was exactly that famous curve. Squeezed
yeah,
by the suppliers on one end, squeezed by the customers on the other. What business we should belong in.
yeah. Deb, your comments on this question?
Yeah, so one of the things I wrote about my book is the 4 types of allies, and I talk about mentors versus sponsors. Mentors give you advice, and I have some incredible mentors, but sponsors are the people who open doors. They're the ones who get your next job. They're the ones who suggest you for the board. They're the people who are there and believe in you, as Raj said, that you didn't even believe in yourself when Bob is like, well, why me? Like, why do I deserve this? So much of my career, the step functions in my career happened because of a career sponsor. And a lot of them were people who are farther up in the organization who see something in you. But by the way, on sponsorship, most people sponsor people who look like them because they tend to sponsor people who look like somebody who could be their kid or they see themselves 10, 15 years ago. And so, if you're looking for sponsorships in organizations, often the people at the very top don't look like any of us here. And that is a challenge in some of the fields. But, I think to Bob's point, like make yourself worthy of being sponsored.
Yeah,
Like listen to your mentors and then thank them and loop back, like make them look good. I think so often we forget that, I mentor a lot of people. We used to get assigned people we had to mentor, but I didn't sponsor everybody. And the people I sponsored are the ones who came back and said, hey, I took your advice and here's what I did. Is there, they sought information, they wanted feedback, they wanted to get better. And those are the people I ended up sponsoring and being really close to over many years, as opposed to the people who are like, okay, I took your advice and then I never heard from them again. And so I do think it's really important as you think about getting career sponsors is people who are really going to open doors for you or people who you nurture that relationship and you give something back to them too.
yeah. By the way, so Deb, you've segued into my next question, which is there's a interesting difference between mentors and sponsors. There's a big difference, right? And as Deb said, mentors is, it could be they're just being helpful to you in your career thinking about this and that. So, but that doesn't mean they're going to be a sponsor, right? And so I'd like Deb, so you did a great job of introducing this topic. Bob and Raj, any comments about the difference between mentors and sponsors, and how you develop sponsors versus developing mentors. Bob, you want to start out?
So I completely agree with how Deb described the difference, and that's the way I see it too. And again, I don't know that I can reflect upon any kind of conscious decision to to develop either, but I do see the distinction between the two.
Yeah, Raj?
Yeah, I was actually say I was fortunate that most of my sponsors were in higher positions in the organization, and they became my sponsors. So for me, my mentors were also my sponsors, other than the example I gave of a friend in France. So, they were mentors, but at the same time, they also happened to be in positions of authority or moving up the organization chart. And when they had an opportunity or a position that opened up, and they thought of me. So, I mean, in a way, I almost had mentors and sponsors were same people, same four people at Roman Haas.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, Deb made a really good point. Deb, I'm really glad you're on this panel, right? She made a really good point, which is it's got to be a two-way street, because, well, first of all, obviously you have to be respected because no one is going to sponsor someone they don't think is good. It's too risky for them. But beyond that, as Deb said, you got to find ways to be helpful to them. Because if you just take it as saying, help me, help me, help me, and there's no effort on your part, and it doesn't mean you give them career help. Help can be a lot of different things, right? But you got to find ways to give back. Otherwise, they just say, well, it's take, 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 take. That's it. Nothing comes back.
Oh, you have to make them look good too.
Yeah.
That's they were some of them my direct bosses, and I worked for them, and they saw what I did, and what they got credit for it as well along the way. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And Deb, so I guess, but Deb, could you elaborate on what you think? What are the things you need to think about going the other way to develop a sponsor?
Well, I think the most important thing to develop a sponsor is really thinking about like why would they want to help you? Right? What is it, and they even if it's out of the goodness of their heart, why you? And really thinking about like what is it do you bring to the table? So often we think, well, we don't deserve it, so then we don't show the reasons. But actually there was somebody on my team who I sponsor a lot of people who reported to me or skip level reports. And there's somebody who was two levels down. He said to me, "Why don't you sponsor me? I see how you help other people on your team, and you don't support me." And it took a lot of courage. I mean, I was his skip level VP and he was, I had control over his career in many ways. And when he asked me that, I had to reflect on why I wasn't his sponsor. And I came back, I said, I don't want to give you an answer. I want to think about it. And I thought about it and I came back to him and I said, I feel like when we have a conversation, you're trying to tell me what I need to hear, what you think I need to hear, not what the truth is. And I can't sponsor somebody where I can't feel like you're telling me the full truth.
Yeah.
And he explained why he did that. He said, last time I was reporting to somebody, and when I told them the truth, like the product wasn't working, they really punished me. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about. But here's the thing, like I would support this guy's career to the end of the earth because he did something that was so hard, which was confronting somebody who is your skip level manager and able to have, could make or break your career. And I think that that's the kind of thing where a sponsor wants to know that you have courage. They want to know that if they put you in that position, you're going to do justice. I'm on the board of Intuit because Sheryl Sandberg introduced me to the CEO of Intuit. I am very open about that. And the reason I'm open about it is that I want people to see the power of sponsorship, but also I had to do the work. You don't just get introduced and that's it. Like Raj was saying, somebody brought him with him to this new role, but he still has to do the work, right? He has to actually deliver. And so it's not just the opening the door, but you have to walk through and make things happen on the other side for that sponsor to continue to sponsor you.
True.
Well,
Peter, you asked a question a little while ago about, what would a mentor or sponsor see in me or see in somebody that they wanted to be a sponsor. And the phrase that comes to mind is it's always really attractive to meet somebody who's really comfortable in their own skin,
Mm.
who likes themselves, and and we were talking about needy people or something like that. It's always attractive to work with people who are comfortable with who they are. And we talk a lot about Asian Americans and the challenges of being different and all that sort of thing. But I'm reminded of this little story on the playground when I was a kid. This is probably one of my early memories. But standing around a circle in the playground, I must have been about 8 years old. And the kids around, this is a good ancestry.com story here, Deb. But anyway, the kids are going, well, I'm half Italian and one third and a quarter Irish and a quarter English. And it goes around the circle like this. These kids are all reciting what they're a quarter of, what they're a half of. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, I have nothing to add to this conversation. So I come home to my mother, who speaks Chinese at home. She doesn't speak much English. And I said, okay, Mom, what am I? And she says, you're Chinese. So I said, okay, if you can look back at more generations, what am I? Thinking that maybe if she went back far enough, there would be something else interesting, And she'd say, you're Chinese. And then finally I asked her one more time, and she looked at me in her broken English and she said, you 100% Chinese. And I'll never forget that little conversation, because what she was teaching me was to be proud of who I was.
Comfortable in your skin.
Comfortable in your own skin. Exactly. And using that strength of being comfortable with who you are to essentially put your best foot forward.
Bob, you should have just played the game. You should say, well, I'm half Shanghai and half Tianjin, and and then everybody in that group would say, oh, okay, we get you.
yeah. I didn't know. I wasn't that wise and that worldly.
8-year-old.
Yeah. So it's interesting. The reason why I approached the three of you to be panelists was because you covered a lot of different bases. One, you've been successful, large companies in different circumstances, but also that you had succeeded by understanding the importance of being personal marketing and so forth. But all three of you also have turned around and very aggressively been mentors, right, for other people. And in some cases, pretty extreme, like Raj Gupta, right? And at what point do you feel that mentoring other people was important to you as something you wanted to do? And how did you go about it? And what are the best ways to be an effective mentor? Because you can be a good mentor or a bad mentor, right? Right?
Rush?
Yeah, man. I think in our case, I give credit to my predecessor, Larry Wilson, whom, of course, Peter knows as well. And, he came to conclusion long before I became CEO, probably in the late 80s, that leadership was going to be the critical skill that's needed, because we used to have functional managers, people who were either in sales, R&D, finance, manufacturing, but stayed in their box. And when they became division head or ran a bigger business or a region, they were not quite ready for it. And he started this program to make more people get ready for being general managers, to look at different perspectives and get full ownership of their responsibilities. And that led to literally a 20-year program where 80 of us participated, which was a very honest 360-degree assessment, identification of strength, ownership by the CEO and CHRO and the division head, sort of functional head, about the development of those people, including my own. I was one of the very first guinea pigs in this program. And in fact, the last article that you saw, Peter, which talked about 51 ex-Rohm and Haas who are CEOs, 22 public companies and 34 private companies today around the world, women, 7 different nationalities. The real thing of that goes back to that investment in people, making them self-confident, as well as fully understanding all dimensions of business, not just one aspect of business. And I think that required, as I say, engagement. Not this was not a human resources project. It was a business-led, CEO-led project. And out of the 51 who were CEOs, about 21 of them worked for me at one time or other. And and I think that is such an important part is for how do you raise the confidence of people that they can rise up, they become ambitious enough to take more responsibilities and make a difference. And I think it's a complicated process, but it requires investment. And in fact, a number of people have asked me, it was maybe it made sense when people had career in one company, but I don't think that's really important because it doesn't matter even if you are changing jobs and companies are only retaining people for 5 years and 10 years. Getting that background and training becomes such an important part of self-development and ownership and what I call trust and transparency that you build with your team. And also being not incremental thinker, but also brave thinker in terms of making changes. So there are a lot goes into really developing people and making them comfortable and ambitious.
Yeah. Now, I've been reading through all the questions that the people have submitted, and the good news is the panel has addressed almost all of them. There's one that you haven't addressed, but I don't know whether you feel comfortable because it's not in the corporate space, but I'll read it anyway, just in case you have some comment. Uh, the the questioner says, thank you for making the webinar possible. I'm an employee in the U.S. government. I am very interested in knowing if there's any advice you can share for those in the public sector in terms of personal marketing and networking versus those in the private sector. Thank you. Now, you reason why I hesitated, but I think maybe the one or more of you might have exposure to the public sector and have some thoughts.
I think the role of mentorship in public sector is as important as it is in the private sector. And, in many times this happens through, what you're contributing. Now, you may not even be working directly with the person. I can give you maybe not to brag, but give you an example of my own family. Our younger daughter was at ACLU as head of litigation, and then it was then Attorney General who reached out to her to say, I want you to head up Civil Rights Division. And then the next Attorney General asked her to become the Associate Attorney General of the United States. I mean, that was really the mentorship was provided, and sometimes the mentors are unknown to you and both of them are still dear friends of hers. So mentorship in public sector can happen based on what you're doing and what impact you're having. And getting the word gets out as to what is your expertise, what's your contribution. And there's I think that is as relevant in public sector as it is in the private sector.
I can make one comment. My wife, who is a university professor, but she's been in and out of government. And just from her observation is it really depends on what part of government. It really is very, very different. So if you're in an appointed position or if you're different parts of government behave very differently, just like business, partnerships and corporations, so forth are different. So I guess if she were to be on the panel and she would comment, and Raj, you know her well, she would say, the rules probably similar, but the differences have to do more with what part of government you're in and what the nature is, more than whether it's government versus, whether. Yeah, that's right. Well, we have reached the end of the hour, and first of all, I really want to thank the three of you, our panelists. You have done a wonderful job, and also we achieved also our purpose, which is the diversity among the three of you, because the three of you have some very different careers. It has been very wonderful addition to this panel. So I really want to thank the three of you And this is being recorded and will be available to all the people who attended today, but also to people who couldn't attend because of the, because of the timing or otherwise. But again, thank you, all three of you, Bob, Raj, and Deb. And all I can say this is, Raj, so many people said, if you want to succeed, you have to learn how to play golf. But I never learned.
Not my level of golf. It's no good.
Well. First of all, so 2 years ago, a friend of mine retired and said, "I want to learn how to play golf. You've got to learn how to play golf because I need to play." So I started learning, and I'm not a good golf player. And Raj, uh, I guess you're a good example that being a good golf player is not the key to success in business, right?
That I totally agree with.
But if that was the case, I know his wife, Kamala, who is an excellent golfer, and she would be CEO of 4 or 5 companies if that was the case, right? Well, thank you all, and I want to
Thank you.
thank the audience for attending, and we'll see you at the next one. We have a number of you're all on the mailing list. We have a number of really exciting programs over the next couple of months, and we hope to see you there as well.
Okay, thank
Well,
you.
my
Thanks,
pleasure.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good job.
Bye.
Bye-bye.